The union budget for the financial year 22-23 has finally been declared by our finance minister. Now, a lot of people find it difficult to understand and interpret the budget, and rightly so, because it's loaded with a lot of financial terms and jargons. So in this video, we are going to take this approach. I will decode the budget for you in a very simplified manner. How will I do that? I will tell you three sectors that can end up becoming major drivers of growth post this budget. I will also tell you some stocks within each of these sectors that can be front runners in this aspect. Post that, I will give you a very brief summary, both good and bad, of this union budget. And after all this is covered, I will leave it up to you to understand the budget, to interpret it in your own way, and to finally decide it for yourself whether it's good or bad. So please make sure that you watch this video till the very end, and I promise you that you will definitely learn something fruitful out of this. So let's begin. The first sector that can be a potential driver of growth is the infrastructure sector. Now, if I were to summarize the development here in two words, that would be capital expenditure. Now, capital expenditure is the money that the government spends to fund infrastructure related projects. These could be in the form of construction of roads, construction of railways, metro stations, even building new hospitals, new colleges, etc., etc. Now, in this year's budget, the government has said that they are going to increase their spending by 35% from 5.7 lakh crores last year to 7.7 lakh crores this year. This growth of 35% is a huge number. Now understand what this additional spending is going to do. This could mean that the government might want to include new projects that might drive the infrastructural development of the country. It could also bring about timely execution of those projects. The end result would be, when these projects kick off and they are entirely finished, they are going to be massive drivers of growth. Why? Because they are going to drive demand in the economy. They are going to generate employment for thousands and thousands of people. These factors are then going to have a ripple effect on the growth of the overall economy, and that is why I believe that this additional spend, if executed properly, which is a huge challenge in my opinion, will drive the next phase of growth for India. Now let's talk about some stocks that can be front runners in this regard. L&T Infrastructure, NBCC, NCC could potentially bring about the much needed growth prospects for the infrastructure sector. But make no mistake, this is not a stock recommendation video. This is only for educational purposes and for you to understand how will the government's policies bring about a change in the real scheme of things, and how will infrastructure drive that growth for India. With that thought in mind, let's take a look at the second sector. The second sector is the electric vehicles or the electric mobility sector. Now, there were huge challenges in this space before the budget related to the battery, the operations part of it, the financials part of it, related to how the battery will be charged, etc., etc. Are these issues resolved post the budget? Absolutely not. But at least there are signs that the government is willing to address concerns on that front. In fact, in this year's budget, they have explicitly said that they are going to provide a battery swapping facility for all the customers. While this in itself is not going to solve all the problems in this EV space, it still needs a lot of intervention for the government. But I am happy to see that the government is willing to address all such concerns to develop this EV space. What adds confidence to my belief is the fact that this is a clean energy space. It's going to help the government reduce the carbon footprint in the country, and hence the push towards electric vehicles will end up driving the next phase of growth for India in the next couple of years. If you talk about the stocks driving this, stocks like Exide Batteries, Amara Raja Batteries, Minda Industries could very well end up playing the front runner role in this aspect. Now, I have also made a very detailed video on what are the kind of EV stocks that can be bought. The link of that video is present in the description for you to look at. Now, let us talk about the final sector that could end up driving the growth for India. Now, the third sector is the financial institutions sector. Now, the finance minister in this year's budget came up with a ton of small announcements, but in my opinion, none of those is going to have a sizable impact. So we are not going to discuss about those, but still I am bullish on this sector and I believe that this can end up driving growth for our country, and here is the reason for that. All the sectors, for them to grow, they will eventually need funds. For this procurement of funds, they will have to reach out to banks. So banks will ultimately be driving the growth by lending enough money to all those sectors. By giving a support on the lending front, we do expect that with all the sectors, the banks will also grow and the economy is also going to be on a growth trajectory. Not only that, the banks have come up with a stellar performance in their quarterly results. You talk about revenues, you talk about profits. Most of the banks have shown a healthy growth on all fronts. And that is why I am betting on these banks to drive the growth for our country. In terms of the stocks that can affect it, you talk about HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, Kotak Bank, Axis Bank. The private sector banks will eventually play a front runner's role here. In terms of the public sector banks, I still believe that only SBI is a good enough and a large enough player to move the needle and cause an overall impact. Alright, so these are the three sectors. Let us now talk about the major summary of the budget, both about what worked well and what could have been done. Let's first understand what I particularly liked about the budget. Now, this is a budget that is largely centered around growth through capital expenditure for the most part. Now, by showing that the government is willing to spend that extra amount of money for capital expenditure, we clearly get a sense that the government is prioritizing growth at the moment. Inflation might not be that big of a concern for them right now, which in my opinion is a good sign because we do need growth, because we have faced some really tough economic situations post the first wave, the second wave and Omicron wave of the COVID virus. The second point here is that this budget is not focused towards elections. Now, like it or not, this is a government that faces elections in 5 key states. It was expected that the government will ramp up their expectations, their spending power in those 5 states itself. But we have not heard any similar news, which shows that the government is prioritizing country over states and development over politics, which is again a very healthy sign for any country's growth. The third part is with respect to the GST collections. The finance minister pointed out that January saw a whopping GST collections of 1.4 lakh crores, which is the highest ever in a single month. This just goes to show that the economy is on a growth path and the government will eventually have funds in the form of GST collections. With more funds for the government, they can make sure that they can spend enough money on all the projects where they have planned. This will make sure that projects are not stuck either due to lack of funds or due to lack of timely execution, and this in my opinion is also a very positive sign as far as this year's budget is concerned. Now this is as far as the good things were concerned. Let us find out what more could have been done. The first disappointment was that there was absolutely nothing when it comes to the middle class or for the salaried class. Now this is becoming a trend year on year in every year's budget. We hardly find any announcement that restricts to only middle class or the salaried class. There were no exemptions, there were no income tax benefits, but to be very honest, going by the trend, it would have been foolish to expect something of this regard from the finance minister. On the contrary, we do see exemptions being taken away a couple of years back. So things like raising the ATC tax exemption limit or giving us any additional benefits just do not fit well in the overall scheme of things for the finance minister. Having said that, this was still a disappointment for a lot of people. The second disappointment, according to me, was that there was absolutely nothing in terms of relief to be given to stressed sectors. Now, sectors like tourism that involve hotels, restaurants were suffering massively during all the waves of COVID because they are the first ones to suffer when COVID cases spike up. To be very honest, I did expect some sort of a relief from the government to these sectors. This could be in the form of GST deductions, tax exemptions, and this would have gone a long way in boosting the demand for these sectors because once the economy opens up, these sectors do happen to show massive growth as well. But unfortunately, we did not see any relief on that front as well. Alright, these were the major disappointments from my end and the overall summary of this year's budget. Now that you have got a firm grasp on how the budget transpired, what did it include, do let me know in the comments section how did you find the budget, whether it was good and it will drive the growth for the economy or it just left us waiting for a lot of things that didn't come up in this year's budget. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Do subscribe to Finance Lens and I'll see you the next time.